Sunshine Point was completely washed out. Longmire had extensive damage, flooding all over. The reason it was so destructive is heavy snowfall and then very fast melt out with the rain.
The flooding undermined the cabin and we lost the foundation. So effectively the cabin was a bridge. It was straddling what was the newly established creek bed. The chimney collapsed. The building became unsafe.
There's some structural members that have been stressed. A couple rafters have broken.
The building is racking in the way the walls are buckling because it's starting to come off the foundation. Without this work, I'm not sure how much longer it would be salvageable.
It was really apparent that the structure needed work soon if we were going to retain the historic fabrics.
The house was sinking. The backside was a foot lower than the front side when I showed up in 2014 and took a look at this house.
Stehekin is pretty remote. Even today, you can really only get there by hiking or on boat or on a float plane. 100 years ago, it was a lot harder. So people were just kind of making a living with what was around them.
Well, without preservation, the house will essentially disappear. It won't be there for future generations.
Preservation, it's at the very cornerstone of everything that the National Park Service does. For Washington's National Park Fund, our mission is to support the hard work that they do. As lovers of our national parks, we have a tremendous opportunity to come together and help with the restoration of 3 really important projects up in the parks. Let's hear more from the very people whose skills and passion will restore these structures. Not only for our enjoyment, but most importantly, for future generations to come.
The Park Service mission is to preserve. I mean, that's our purpose. We seek to preserve our cultural and natural resources. With the case of the Ipsut Patrol Cabin, that's exactly what we're seeking to do. By getting this cabin back up and operational, we're able to return it to the service of the American public. Mount Rainier National Park is significant because we have a large collection of rustic-style architecture. What most people are familiar with, they refer to it as parkitecture. The Ipsut Patrol Cabin is one of those plans that was designed and developed with this rustic style, which uses natural materials from the surrounding area. And Mount Rainier has a large collection of those rustic-style structures, many of them still intact, which makes our park significant nationally because it demonstrates early Park Service master planning and the retention of those historic resources, much as they were almost 80 years ago.
In early 2007, the cabin was disassembled down to the foundation. It is in current need of a floor. We still have the original floor decking. The doors, all the windows need to be replaced. It needs to be resealed, and a chimney needs to be put back in before we can put a stove and get it back in service.
It's always served as a patrol cabin, and that's sort of our highest goal, is to keep a building in its original use. But we realize today that that isn't always what we're able to do. The patrol cabin was housing and a residence, and the anticipated use of it is for it to be a visitor contact station.
This cabin is a high priority just for the fact that it's a historic structure and it's a patrol cabin. So it's got 2 high priorities to it for the Park Service. It is preservation with a purpose for sure.
When I first arrived at Olympic, one of my first trips was to Dodger Point. I mean, you get up there and you can see Mount Olympus, the Bailey Range, the Elwha. You can see Hurricane Ridge. It's pretty spectacular. It's a neat structure. It's one of the few CCC-era structures that we have in the park. People can go up there and see the vistas that the original fire lookout saw. You know, they can imagine what it was like to be a lookout on Dodger Point in Olympic in the 1930s.
This building's slowly been twisting and racking and kind of coming off of the foundation, which leads to a multitude of problems.
So we're going to straighten the building, replumb it, put the building back on its foundation. It'll get a new roof, good cleaning, little love.
The BUCKNER Homestead is an amazing place. It is one of the last intact cohesive homesteads that we have today, and it happens to be situated in the North Cascades National Park mountains. It's remarkable because a person can go and touch the buildings, tour the buildings, and we are so lucky that many of the places they live, the buildings they constructed, the artifacts they left are still there and intact. And I'm convinced that's why it is so important to maintain.
The materials that were used, probably originally a log foundation, and then after that, a stone and mortar foundation.
So the North Cascades National Park Service crew lifted the entire house up in the air and retrofit a concrete foundation underneath it.
So right now, that's how it is, and there's this kind of ugly looking concrete foundation, which is practical and really works well for the house, but it's not in character with the landscape.
And now we seek to reconstruct those so that the characteristic features of that foundation are evident to all the visitors that come by versus having to look at this concrete foundation, which is where it currently rests.
As the only nonprofit organization committed exclusively to supporting our national parks here in Washington State, Washington's National Park Fund is vital to preserving and maintaining our mission, which is preservation of our natural and cultural resources.
Now more than ever, with funding uncertain for the future, we do rely on outside sources of money like the Washington's National Park Fund to carry us through these times and to be able to focus on this mission so that this property is there for future generations.
That's our mission. That's what we do. We save these resources so that other people can have experiences that you always remember.